As a mother, one of your primary responsibilities is to protect your kids. This woman murdered her kids and left them in her freezer for 2 years. Trigger warning. This woman, Michelle Blair, both tortured and murdered 2 of her 4 kids. Their bodies were found when officers came to evict the family from their apartments, where they found the kids' bodies stored in the freezer. She was arrested and later on confessed to investigators. She said that she became enraged after finding out her 9-year-old son was allegedly sexually assaulting her older son, Matthew. Michelle Blair then stated she didn't intend on killing Stephen, but was proud she did. She put a bag over his head, choked him with a belt, punched him, and burned him with scalding hot water. She then wrapped him in his favorite blanket and placed him in the freezer. 9 months later, her daughter was her next victim. Like for part 2. This woman murdered 2 of her 4 kids and stored them in the freezer for 2 years. Part 2. After killing her 9-year-old son, her daughter was her next victim. 9 months later, she found out her 13-year-old daughter, Stoney, was allegedly sexually assaulting that same older brother, Matthew, as well as Stephen, the brother who was just killed. Michelle Blair admitted to intentionally killing her daughter. I punched her. I put a bag over her head until she lost consciousness. She also said she threw scalding hot water at her daughter and punched her in the head many times. She also starved her by limiting her food to oatmeal once a day. They then got into a physical altercation, and at that point she took her 13-year-old daughter and strangled her with the black shirt, then suffocated her with the black bag. Once she was done killing her, she made her oldest daughter take her little sister's deceased body and put it in the freezer. On top of Stephen, she murdered 9 months earlier. Like for part 3. This woman murdered 2 of her 4 kids and stored them in the freezer for 2 years. Part 3. After murdering her 2 kids, she then took the 2 surviving kids out of school so that no one would grow suspicious of the other 2 missing. There is a high possibility that Michelle Blair was simply abusing her children throughout the years. If the children did in fact abuse each other, it might have been the result of abuse received by their mother. Michelle would be eligible for the death penalty if it existed in Michigan, but it does not. She has been charged with 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of premeditated murder, and 1 count of torture in the children's death. She has been sentenced to life in prison without parole. Visitation to her surviving kids has been suspended and parental rights permanently terminated. But she still says if I had a chance to do it again, I would. In court, she was found saying, "I feel no remorse for the death of those demons."
Storytime about how my husband forced me to do the dirty with another man and filmed it. Disclaimer isn't on my storytime, I said on Instagram. I told my husband to get rid of the video, but he doesn't want to. And now he's asking me to do it again with somebody else. Here's a little backstory. My husband and I have been married for 4 years. He's in the military, so he spends a lot of the time away from me. Now, sometimes I think this is a blessing, but it's also a curse. When he's away from me, he's really sweet. He sends me written hand letters saying how much he loves me and how much he misses me. But in the same breath, he'll turn around and accuse me of sleeping with somebody else because I didn't answer the phone while I was at the supermarket. He gets jealous at least once a week, and we always end up having a huge fight over the phone. But when he is home, he's completely hypersexual. He wants to do it all the time. And if I don't want to do it, he gets upset. He once told me that he should just have a girlfriend so that when I don't want to do it with him, he can have somebody else to do it with. And I know that you guys are going to say this is all toxic behavior, but I don't really try to correct his behavior. Because he's in the army, he thinks everything he does is right. And it's just easier for me to go along with it. Is that bad? Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my husband forced me into doing the dirty with another man while he filmed it. Disclaimer, this is not my story time instead of me on Instagram. And now that I'm asking him to delete it, he says he won't. Like I said in part 1, he's in the army. So when he's home, he's super hypersexual. Always wants to have sex, and if I don't want to, he gets really mad. The last time he went away, he started writing to me about his new fantasy. And guess what his fantasy was? He wants to watch me do it with another man. But as soon as he told me, I said absolutely not. First off, I don't want to do it with any other guy. Secondly, I don't want to do it in front of my husband. Remember how I said he gets jealous and we always fight about it? He said that this way I could do it with any guy that I want and he wouldn't get jealous. I kept saying no for a full 2 days. That's when he started calling me every single night, telling me that if I loved him, I should just do it, and that so many other women would do anything to please their husbands. He even said that I should consider myself lucky that he would be willing to let me do it with somebody else. That's when he started sending me pictures of other men in the army. And he basically said, take your pick. But I kept saying no. Then he spent the next 2 weeks trying to convince me to do it. He wore me down so much that eventually I said yes. Part 3 is part 3 of how my husband forced me into doing it with another man while he filmed it. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's on my Instagram. I finally gave in and said yes to doing it with another guy. I had literal knots in my stomach knowing that I was gonna have to do it. But I justified it because a lot of women do things that they normally wouldn't do for their husbands. So why shouldn't I? My husband finally came home from the army. 2 days later, he scheduled the meeting with the other guy. The guy that I chose from the pictures was actually really handsome. So the doing it part wasn't that hard. It was having my husband in the same room watching that was really hard. Then I noticed that my husband took out a camera. He was full on filming. I told him to turn that off and he said no. So after the guy left, I told my husband to delete the video. But he says he wants to keep it for when he goes away to the army. Everyone has their kinks, but this made me really uncomfortable. I actually feel like I can't trust that he won't show it to anybody. Imagine if he shows it to his army buddies. Now he's asking me to do it with another guy. What the heck should I do?
Storytime of the worst home pregnancy termination. At the time I was 17 and was preparing to graduate high school. When I got pregnant, it was surprising because I was on the birth control pill. I was doing everything I was told to do. I didn't get my period for about 2 months. I was feeling weird, so I decided to take a pregnancy test like any other girl would. And it surprisingly came out positive. So I told my boyfriend, which at the time he was 23, and he thought that I should keep the baby. But I wasn't ready and it wasn't in my plans. He wanted the baby, but he ultimately just let me choose. I couldn't tell my parents because they would kick me out. So my boyfriend helped me with getting money to terminate the pregnancy. When I got to the clinic, they ended up turning me down. They said they would need my parents to sign off because they didn't trust minors to make these type of decisions. I didn't know what else to do, so I decided to terminate my pregnancy at home. But I didn't know how dangerous this was. In doing this, I almost died, which I will be getting into in part 2. Part 2 of the worst at-home pregnancy termination. So like I said, they didn't allow minors to get them at my clinic. When I told my friend about it, she recommended me to her cousin, which at the time had also got the at-home pregnancy termination. When I met up with her cousin, she handed me these pills. She told me to take them every day for a couple weeks and it will terminate the entire pregnancy. She said I would feel a little dizzy and would bleed, but that was a part of the process. So I immediately took them. I didn't even read the box because it was mostly written in Spanish. I was just very desperate at the time. After the first 2 days, I started to get really bad pains, and it was like a period times 10. Honestly, my uterus was on fire. My body was weak and I couldn't eat without it coming back up. So every day I kept taking them. After a couple of days, it was one day where I literally could not even move. That night I passed out. The next morning I woke up in a hospital and the doctors told me that my uterus ruptured.
Am I the asshole for locking my dad out of the house and now he might have pneumonia? My mom died around the time my sister was born, and my dad, 37 male, is an okay guy. He's not the best and has his own stuff going on, but he's not the worst. He leaves town a lot and leaves me and my 15 male and my sister 8 female alone. Usually it's about 4 days and it happens like every 2 to 3 months. There's never a reason and he sometimes just gets drunk and leaves. Most of the time it's without warning and I get pissed because then it's up to me to order food and manage everything going on, but I know it's kind of petty. One day he leaves and doesn't come back for 10 days. Am I the asshole for locking my dad out of the house and causing him to get sick and maybe pneumonia? So 10 days go by before he finally comes back, and at this point I'm really angry. When he comes back, it's around 2 a.m. and raining outside. I go to check who it is, and once I see it's him, I'm really not in the mood to see or talk to him. So through the door, I tell him to get lost. He tells me it's raining like crazy and that he's sorry, but just let him in. By now, I'm even more pissed off, so I just leave him there. The next day, I check outside to see if he's there, and he is, but he looks like shit. So I let him in, and now he's really sick, might even have pneumonia, I'm not sure yet. Am I wrong? Am I the asshole for encouraging my ex-husband to take a DNA test and potentially destroying his family? Me and my ex-husband James tried for 7 years to have a baby, and James didn't like to go to the doctor to solve fertility things. He even encouraged me not to have annual checkups at the gynecologist. He blamed me for being infertile and that I was unable to have our children. We broke up after he accused me of being a sterile bitch. The plot twist is that after meeting my current husband and we started trying, I decided to go to the hospital and check out my fertility problem. To my shock, everything is healthy and I could have had a child for years probably. The doctor pointed out the possibility of James's infertility. Am I the asshole for encouraging my ex-husband to take a DNA test? Now I have 3 children, 4 male, and 2 female. James and I still have mutual friendship and have already met after the divorce. I hadn't seen him though in 3 years until recently. I met up with James and we started talking and he said he was engaged and had a 7-month-old son. I said that I have 3 children and he said, I'm happy for you. You managed to solve your infertility and got your family. I giggled and said, honey, infertility wasn't on my side. I was able to have kids with you too. Well, yesterday, the now ex-fiance called me raging because he got a DNA test and the baby isn't his. Am I the asshole for refusing to grieve with my wife after my aunt's passing? I, 35 male, am married to Jess, 26 female. We dated for 2 years and have been married for 1 now. Most of my family has passed away, but I had 1 aunt from my mother's side. My aunt Jill took an active role in raising me when my mother was unable or unwilling, which was often. I got the news that my aunt Jill passed away and was in shock. I told Jess, who was sympathetic at first, and told her I wanted to be alone. I went to my room and at some point Jess knocked on the door that I needed to talk about it. I said I appreciated it but just needed to be alone. She then said I was an emotional black hole, slammed my door shut, and literally stomped away. Am I the asshole for refusing to grieve with my wife after my aunt's passing? For the next 2 hours, every 10 to 15 minutes or so, Jess would open my door abruptly and half shout asking if I was ready to be an adult. I grew impatient until I finally stood up and went out for a walk. When I got back an hour later, the chain was locked on our front door, which we never use. I repeatedly knocked and pushed the doorbell until Jess said that she'd only let me in if I agreed to talk about what happened. I said no when Jess walked away, but eventually she unlocked it because I kept pounding on the door and she didn't want me to embarrass her in front of the neighbors. She's now furious at me, saying I'm not really grieving and need to let her in on my feelings.